Thank you very much, Clemmy. Good evening, everybody. My name's Craig. As Clemmy explained, I'm actually the operations manager for Global Adventure Challenges. And I've been asked to join this evening to try and give you as much of a flavour as I can of what the St. Peter's Hospice to Paris cycle is likely to entail. And hopefully by the end of the little section that I present to you, you'll have a bit of an idea of what's involved in terms of the itinerary and the commitment that you'll be making, but also importantly, how you'll be supported on that journey as well, hopefully from when you sign up all the way through until when you're actually on the challenge itself, and how our crew will support you, what we'll provide for you, etc., etc. So there's a few little sections we'll go through. I'll do a little bit on who Global Adventure Challenges are. We'll talk about the itinerary. I'll cover some frequently asked questions. And then importantly, what's included in the challenge, what it is that you're actually paying for in terms of that package. And then a little bit about training, and it is a very little bit. And then I'm going to hand back to Clemmy and Hayley to talk to you about the costs and the fundraising side of things. And as Clemmy explained, we'll do some questions, open questions at the end. We're going to have to keep doing the next slide, Hayley, I think. So yeah, if we can go to the next slide. So arguably, this isn't really the most important part of this presentation, because ultimately you're all sort of joined up or interested in joining up because of St. Peter's Hospice. But we've been asked to I suppose facilitate or deliver this challenge, and it's important that you know who it is that's going to be working behind the scenes to do that. And essentially, Global Adventure Challenges have been operating for over 20 years. We aren't a flash in the pan or a cowboy outfit. We're a serious operator, and we do know what we're doing. And we've worked alongside over 1,500 charities and helped it raise in excess of 50 million through the provision of overseas challenges specifically. We do work worldwide. We run a variety of different UK-based challenges, from one-day trekking events to 17-day Everest Base Camp expeditions, and everything in between. And we work with charities and corporate clients to put those on. We are a Travel Vault member, so any money that you put with us is protected. We're also ATOL bonded by the Civil Aviation Authority in the same way that any other tour operator is as well. So you know, we aren't a holiday company, we aren't a tour operator, we don't term ourselves in that way, but essentially we have got the same credentials as other operators like TUI and Thomas Cook, etc. So that's a little bit about us. And if Hayley can do the next couple of slides. Brilliant. This is the bit that everyone really wants to know about. So the St. Peter's Hospice to Paris cycle, it's a little bit of a tweak on, a very nice tweak on what is a very, very well-known European cycle challenge, which is the London to Paris cycle challenge. But obviously we're starting from St. Peter's Hospice in Bristol, and we're going to take that route. Now, when you do a London to Paris cycle, there are a couple of different options for routes. There's a sort of 4-day longer route from London heading through the middle of France, or you can head over towards the other side via Portsmouth and do it in a slightly shorter time on the French side, and that's the one that we're going to do. So the way that the challenge works is that when you turn up for registration, we will effectively sign you in, we'll provide you with an armband, we'll take your luggage from you, and then we'll conduct a big group briefing to make sure that everyone knows what the structure of the day is going to be. And the way that structure works on a day-to-day basis, with the exception, I suppose, of some little challenges in between, which I'll explain, is that generally on a cycling day, we'll cycle in the morning for a couple of hours, then we'll have a water stop, and that water stop will provide you with snacks, water. It might be a hot drink if the weather sort of lends itself to that. So that'll be your first part of the day. Then you'll do some more cycling up until lunchtime, and then there'll be a lunch stop. And depending on the size of the group and the location will depend on what format that takes. So it could be a buffet style lunch that's put out by either our French partner or ourselves, or it could be that we eat in a local restaurant or cafe. And then the afternoon follows a similar format. We cycle a bit more, we have another water stop, and then we cycle a bit more and we get to a hotel. So that's generally the format of how our cycles work. The crew that will be supporting you, there is some variability in it depending on the size of the group. If there's 40, there's obviously more staff than there is if there's 25, but generally speaking, the following roles will be covered in either singular or multiples. So the first of those is the event manager, and the event manager is someone who's entrusted by us to oversee the entire event, and they're an experienced member of crew that's worked with us for a number of years. They're familiar with our policies, procedures, and all the processes involved. They'll also be familiar with running cycling events, particularly in France. So they will make sure that every member of crew knows exactly what they're doing, and ultimately ensure that you have a great time on the event. The other crew that will be supporting them, there will be a bike mechanic, and that bike mechanic will be in a vehicle, and they'll position themselves in various different locations during the day, but mostly you'll find that once the route or once the day's cycling has started, they'll position themselves at the rear of the group. And when I say the rear of the group, and I'll explain a little bit more, the group's going to be spread out over a bit of a distance, but they'll be there and will be contactable, so that if anyone has a mechanical issue, the mechanic will come forward, help resolve it, and then return to the back of the group. So that's the bike mechanic. They'll also be available at the water stops, and they'll also be available every evening during a set period of time for what we call bike surgery, so any repairs that are required for the following day, or to support you with just general maintenance that you need to do anyway, putting extra lubrication on your chain or pumping up your tires or whatever that might be. There'll also be there'll be 2 route markers who'll go out and mark the route with fluorescent arrows, and they, to be honest, they're the unsung heroes of the event, because they're rarely seen. They're normally up before everybody else, and they're actually operating generally a day ahead of us. So when you've left on day 1 to cycle from the hospice in Bristol to Warminster, they'll already be away, and they'll be going from Warminster to Portsmouth on the day that we're cycling. So they're always a day ahead of us. And then there'll also be, 1 or 2 other crew, depending on numbers, that will look after making sure that we've got water stops in place at the right times, taking your luggage from one hotel to the next and making sure that that's ready, making sure that the place that we're eating lunch or the person that's providing it for us is there and on time. Essentially, what our crew will be looking to achieve is that all you really need to focus on is cycling from A to B, and we'll look after you with everything in between, and you'll need to carry your bags to your rooms. I think that's probably the only other bit. So we'll look after you in that respect. So that's a general idea of how each day runs, and now I'll sort of go through each day chronologically to paint a picture of the actual itinerary. So on day 1, we're going to meet about lunchtime. So on this day, breakfast and lunch aren't included, and then we're going to do a registration. And then on this day, we've got I don't know, you could call it a warm-up cycle if you wanted, but around about 40 miles to cover from St. Peter's Hospice to Warminster. So we're still in the UK on this day. Could you do the next slide, please, Hayley? Because I must confess, I don't know this route off by heart because it is new. So with our cycle route, we're heading in an easterly direction towards Bath. And Bath's about halfway through that 40-mile cycle. So you would anticipate that your first stop is going to be in Bath. Because we're only cycling half a day, there isn't going to be a lunch stop and then a water stop in that format. It will only be a water stop on that afternoon. And then if we go to the next slide, sorry, and I have to keep moving this around now so I can see the wording. Bear with me. Yeah, we'll then carry on the rest of the cycle to the hotel. So this day, although it's only 40 miles, it definitely isn't easy, because once we're out of Bristol, we're sort of heading across the southern end of the Cotswolds. So it will be undulating, and undulating is a term that you'll hear us use quite a lot when we describe our cycles. They're certainly not hilly or mountainous, but undulating definitely. it's all English countryside. All of our routes are generally set up to cycle on the quietest available road. Sometimes that isn't entirely possible, and there will be sections where we're on busier stretches, particularly when we're entering towns and cities. But on the most part, we'll be looking to, I suppose, back road it between each place in the most sort of linear way that we possibly can. And then we're going to get to Warminster. And when we get there, like I said, the crew should already be in position. Your bags will be there ready. They'll have checked the group in, and they should just be able to hand you keys and bags, and you give your bikes in or put them in the storage room for the night, and then go and get some rest. Can you go to the next slide? Sorry, Hayley. Perfect. When you get into each hotel, depending on how we've managed to get through the day, will depend on how much time there is. Now, with charity challenges, I suppose with any challenge, really, there is an element of remaining adaptable. Obviously, we do plan everything out in sort of minute detail as to what the timings are going to be. But if we have a particularly bad run on a day, for example, where I know we had lots of punctures that we weren't expecting because there'd been lots of rain and debris washed onto the road, then that might set us back a little bit. So it might be that when we get into the hotel on that night, that actually we only got a very small window before we have to go for our group meal. In an ideal world, we'll get in, there'll be time for a beer, time to get changed, showered, and all casually meet in the evening. That's the best case scenario. But I just want to be transparent with everyone about, the fact that it is a charity challenge and there is some challenging elements in it. And sometimes those challenging elements aren't necessarily the cycling. It can sometimes be I've just got to the hotel and, I've only got 5 minutes for dinner, or I've got 5 minutes until my dinner, or, the other bits outside of it that sort of add to that element of challenge that you perhaps wouldn't be used to. When you have the group evening meal, there is then a briefing for the following day. So it's important that everybody attends that. That briefing will cover what time you need to leave the following day, where bags need to go, any other important logistics, an update on the weather, etc. The score with leaving at a certain time will largely depend on the group and the progress made. So, for example, if on day 2 it works out that everyone's cycling at 20 kilometers an hour or 20 miles an hour, and we're absolutely hammering through, then obviously we can stay in bed a little bit longer. If we're not making much progress, or the weather's going to be against us, or we want to make sure we've got enough contingency time because we've got a ferry to catch or whatever it is, then we might leave earlier. Now, depending on the size of the group will depend on how flexible that will be. So if the group's a little bit bigger, what we might say to people is that you can, the earliest you can leave is 8 o'clock, and the latest you can leave is 9 o'clock. Now, obviously, nobody's allowed to cycle on their own, but in small groups, then you've got the ability to sort of say, okay, well, we're going to leave a little bit later, but we're going to pedal really hard to the first water stop. And by the time everyone's at lunch, everyone's sort of grouped themselves back up again. So that's generally how we work. But obviously, as a team, we can only manage to supervise a certain amount of distance. We can't have people at the next night's hotel and people only just leaving the hotel, giving us sort of 80 miles of puncture repairs to cover. That's generally how we try and get the best of both worlds. One, keeping the group together, because that's really important, and two, giving people the freedom to be able to cycle at a speed that's comfortable to them. So day 2, bags out of rooms, bikes collected, off we go. We've got 67 miles to do to cycle to Portsmouth. Again, it's going to be a similar day to the previous day, albeit the distance is a little bit longer. You're going to be heading along the outskirts of Cranbourne Chase, AOMB, and towards Salisbury. And Salisbury is probably where the first water stop's likely to be. And then if we go to the next slide, Hayley, if that's okay. Today, again, it's going to be undulating, but then as we get closer towards Portsmouth, particularly Southampton, then we're sort of dropping down towards sea level. So again, there is some undulation, but there's nothing of any great significance. I'd say more sort of rolling roads. And by the time we get to the outskirts of Southampton, it should be lunchtime. Now, with it being a 67-mile day, you're probably going to expect to sort of do 3 20-mile sections realistically, or roughly around about that figure. And so lunch will be 40 miles in, then we'll have lunch, and then we'll do the last 20 miles to get us into Portsmouth. Now, when we get to Portsmouth, it's a little bit different than just getting into the hotel, because there isn't a hotel for this evening, or not an overnight hotel, certainly. So what happens is with the overnight ferries, when we run these type of challenges, is that we always arrive into the city that we're departing from, or the town that we're departing from, and go to our hotel or a place to freshen up. So previously in Portsmouth, we've used the Premier Inn, for example. So we'll book a number of rooms with the Premier Inn to enable everybody to be able to get showered and changed. So that's not a room per person. Those rooms are generally booked on around about a 1 to 10 basis. So 1 room to 10 people. And then in turn, everyone will be able to go up, get a shower, get changed, and then we'll go for food before we get the ferry across to Caen. The baggage or luggage situation on this, or at this point of the event, can become a little bit complex. So I'll try my best to explain without boring you too much, but ultimately, once you've signed up, it'll be fine, and we'll get it covered again if needs be. So what's going to happen is, once we've had our evening meal, we're going to get onto the ferry. So what should happen in an ideal world is that you're going to walk onto the ferry with your bikes, and along with you and your bike, you're going to take on with you some hand luggage. And that hand luggage is going to contain your cycling kit for the following day, so including your shoes, your helmet, and whatever you need to wear or carry. And it's also going to include anything that you need for the overnight: pajamas and a wash bag, as an example. What's going to then happen is your main luggage is going to stay on our support vehicle until you then get to the first night's hotel once you're in France. What will then happen, once the ferry has docked in Caen, you'll cycle off the ferry in your cycling gear, and all your overnight stuff will be in your hand luggage. And then what you're going to do is hand your hand luggage to our crew, and then go about your day's cycling. So where that becomes a little bit complicated is just generally around your organisation with what you need and what you don't need. Time permitting, there will be access to your main luggage when we get to the Freshen Up Hotel in Portsmouth. But it is much better if you've organised that into a way where you can say, well, no, that's my bag, that's what I need. And you take your small bag out of your big bag, and then it's all done and dusted. That's idealistic. But generally, as long as you understand that's how it's going to work, that's the general script. So we board the ferry. It's an overnight ferry. And the cabins are 4-berth cabins. You've got a cabin for the night, and we get into Caen very early in the morning. So if you go to day 3, Hayley, we get into Caen at 7 o'clock in the morning, there or thereabouts. We don't actually have food on board. We take a short cycle into Caen, and then we get some breakfast there. And then we're straight back into the saddle then for what is a pretty long day, really, compared to the previous 2 that we've just had. But we have got an early start that's in our favour. So it's an 88-mile day from Caen to Evro. And it will be very different to cycling when we're on the UK side. So although in the UK side we're on very rural roads, when you get to France, for those who haven't cycled over that side, we will be cycling rurally again. So we'll be back roading through to the next town. It's much quieter, and cyclists are much more accepted than they are on UK roads. So actually, once you get to France and you get off the boat and you start cycling, it's almost like a sense of relief, really. The 88 miles is much easier to eat up than it is to eat up 88 miles in the UK. Again, my description of the elevation that's involved, it's undulating. There's nothing of any great significance in terms of huge climbs, although it might not feel like that when you're taking on what will potentially be a small hill at some point in the day. But it is generally undulating roads. And like I say, nice, quiet, open French countryside. Can we do next slide? So yeah, lunch stop in Lisieux, some sort of buffet lunch, and then we'll go to Evro where we overnight. Just with regards to the hotels, because I haven't mentioned it, what we provide is twin share hotels, generally 3-star standard. So just to give you an example of the types of chains that we use, which will give you a bit of an indication of the level of those hotels. In the UK, we tend to use Premier Inn. That's probably the main one, to be honest, in the UK that we'd always try and opt for. But there are any others. Ibis, there's even Campanile now in the UK in some major cities. In France, Campanile, Ibis Budget. You might get some Novotels. In Cairn, there's actually a really nice hotel, which is a weird offshoot of Ibis, but it's like a cycling specific hotel. So there's all sorts of different ones essentially, but just to give you an idea of those brands. Once again, in Evro, we'll overnight, it'll be the same drill, bikes off, bikes in storage, bags to rooms, evening meal, briefing, and then up in the morning to do the same. Now, the final day, Evro to Paris, 71 miles. I would anticipate that this day will be an early start. Because it's the last day of cycling, we want to get everyone into Paris as early as possible, so we get the opportunity to sort of soak up the atmosphere when we finished under the Eiffel Tower, and also get back to the hotel at a relatively early time, so everyone's got definitely got time to shower and change before the celebratory meal. It's one night that's almost essential. It's 71 miles. Now, what happens on this day is we will aim to get to a meeting point, and that meeting point for us is the Louis Vuitton Foundation. So what will happen, it'll be the same setup as the previous days in terms of water stop, lunch, water stop, but following that second water stop, the aim will be for everyone to get to the Louis Vuitton Foundation. Now, when you get to Paris, obviously the cycling is a little bit more arduous, and that's just because of the volume of traffic. So actually, although you might have made great speed on those rural roads getting towards the périphérique, to the outskirts of Paris, once you hit Paris with traffic lights and general traffic, it can become quite tedious. So with that, what tends to happen is the group end up a little bit spread out. So we meet at the Louis Vuitton Foundation, and the crew will give a time for that, and then we regroup. And then from the Louis Vuitton Foundation, we take the short cycle together. It's almost like a lap of honor or a guard of honor, really, at the end of the challenge to reach the finish. And it's pretty spectacular, and it's a great feeling to be riding through some of the iconic sites of Paris. So the Champs-Élysées, the Arc de Triomphe, around past the Louvre, and then down to the Eiffel Tower, where we finish. And we finish on a road called the Jacques de Roof, which is at the back of the Eiffel Tower, which gives us one space to be able to take the time to give everyone medals and a glass of fizz and take photographs, the obligatory bike in the air photo and that kind of thing. But also it's a great view of the Eiffel Tower as well. So we'll all cycle into there as a group. It might be a slightly spread group, but certainly we'll all be very, very close together. And then we'll give those medals, like I said. And then from there, there'll be a little bit of time for everyone to do their own milling around and take photos. And then we will take a short cycle to whichever hotel we're staying in Paris. Again, it could be Novotel, could be Ibis, could be Mercure. They're generally the main ones that we would stay in. And then same drill again, bikes, but instead of going into storage, they'll definitely go onto the vans, and you'll be able to go and check into your room and get freshened up for the evening meal. And then the celebratory meal is a chance for everyone to share stories. There might be some speeches, some awards, that kind of thing. What will happen with your bikes from this point forward is that they will stay in our vans, and our crew on the next day, whilst you've got plenty of free time, will be leaving super early in the morning to make sure that those bikes are back in Bristol before you are. So what will happen is they will give you two choices. Either your bike goes back to the hospice, or you meet your bike at London St Pancras and then collect it and make your onward journey to wherever you're going, which I guess in this case is only going to really be beneficial for those that aren't local to Bristol, really, when they sign up. The crew will then take them back, and then on the following day, I don't know if you want to skip to the next slide, Hayley. There's some pictures. There we go. Paris to the UK. So you get some free time the following day before taking the Eurostar back. So generally what happens is everybody does their own thing on that morning, really, up until the time that you need to be at Gare du Nord station for the Eurostar. So it depends on what Eurostar time we get as to how much free time you've got. It's likely to be somewhere around about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, maybe up to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Whichever way you look at it, there is another train generally that runs about 6 o'clock. It tends to be quite late, which gives you more time in Paris, but makes it difficult for everyone getting back. So it is subject to what trains we can get. Generally, the 1 and 3 is our preferred option to give you an idea. You'll then make your own way to Gare du Nord station. A member of our crew will meet you there and escort the group back